Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you are a returning listener or subscriber, so glad to have you back with us. If you're new to the channel, you do like what you're hearing, please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button on your way out. It is a passive gesture that goes a very, very long way. Excited to kick the week off with TIR member, Latin American correspondent. I love the way that sounds. Latin American correspondent. Today, we will explore some of the most significant political developments in Latin America, focusing on Bolivia, Mexico, Peru, and Argentina, just to name a few. We'll dive into Bolivia's recent attempted coup, analyze the current political situation in the country, and discuss what this means for the future of the MAS party. We'll also turn our attention to Mexico, where the nation has elected its first female president. Beyond the historic milestone, is Claudia Sheinbaum a continuation of what Mexico had with AMLO? And if so, is that a good thing? Will Sheinbaum go even further left than her predecessor? Is that even possible? Finally, we'll examine the unfolding events in Peru and Argentina. Peru, once thought of as a beacon of hope for leftists in the West, is little discussed considering how Pedro Castillo's time in power ended. Argentina recently elected a far-right libertarian president who vowed to dollarize the economy and get away from central banking. Argentina's austerity reforms have been looked upon favorably by the IMF, and they received $4.7 billion in loans, providing a comprehensive could Milei's austerity program trigger mass unemployment in the country? In Bolivia, political turmoil has been a recurring theme over the past few years. The recent attempted coup has once again thrown the nation into a state of uncertainty, raising questions about the stability of its democratic institutions and the future of its leadership. We'll dissect the factors that led to this attempted coup, the key players involved, and the potential consequences for the Bolivarian, I can't talk right now, society and its economy. Turning to Peru, we'll see a nation grappling with political instability and social unrest. Recent changes in leadership and ongoing protests highlight the deep-seated issues facing the country. We'll explore the root causes of these challenges, the responses from the government and the opposition, and what lies ahead for the Peruvian people. So let's bring in our Latin correspondent. He is a TIR member. Please welcome, coming all the way live from Peru, Camilo Gomez.
Hi.
Bam! Now you're on the big screen.
It's always great to be here, and yeah, I mean it's all things happening, right? And I mean, to begin, I think like it was kind of a surprise. The 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 coup in Bolivia, like it was curious. The in a way, like thinking in terms of Bolivia, like sometimes kind of grabs the news and sometimes it doesn't, and there has been like mainly on the news, like the what was mainly on the news before was that Bolivia doesn't have much dollar right now because it kind of got into debt in the context of COVID-19, and then also like its production of natural gas, which was kind of like the center of its economy in the last 2 decades, having like being much more shorter. So in that sense, like there have been a lot of protests that kind of like follow um different trade unions, particularly of kind of uh, like transport trade unions, things like that, because they they buy merchandise from neighboring countries and they sell it in Bolivia. But now without dollars, like everything becomes much more difficult to exchange. And Bolivia, something that is interesting is that unlike Argentina or Venezuela, we're known like to having a very massive inflation, had a very controlled exchange rate. Like one dollar was around like 7 Bolivian pesos, around that for quite a while of time. And now like there is an official exchange rate, right? Like in Argentina, the the exchange rate like is changing, in a it is still not as crazy as it was in Argentina. Like an official exchange rate like is 10 pesos, which is not as like as other unofficial exchange rate were like
That's
uh,
better than where I live.
or 100% different,
Yeah.
right? But it is close into to something that it wasn't, right? So there has been discontent with the government, and there is also a division inside the mass between kind of like the faction led by the current president, Luis Arce, and the faction led by Evo Morales. And that
Can
is,
we I hate to I don't want to interrupt you too bad on that, but that is interesting because within the party, which is this is Bolivia's Socialist Party, would you say this is the furthest left party in Bolivia right now?
yeah, it is the only party that has like kind of their own kind of inscription, right? Because like the Bolivian political tradition is very curious, because a lot of times, because of heavy influence of Trotskyism, there was always the talk of factions, right? And factions or fractions is kind of like this very Trotskyist kind of terminology, which makes sense, even in the sense like at one point like Trotskyists were part of the movement over socialism. Filemon Escobar, who was well known by Trotskyists, like he was also I think at one point member of the party. He was elected to Senate, and I think like so. y- Then the relation became much more sour with Trotsky's, but overall, like with the rest of the Bolivian left, like a significant part stay inside of the mass, despite their disagreements, and the other parties didn't weren't able to try to get their own how to say it, their own inscription, right? Like their other to be able to run under their own party name. Like in a strange way, some Trotskyists also end up running on the Green Party, but the Green Party wasn't able to get ballot access, so that went away. And so the attempts of creating a different kind of opposition to the to the to the movement or socialism like has been there, like mainly as I mentioned, uh, or at least most explicitly by Trotskys, who after like initially back in like kind of become much enemies of what they see as some indications of nationalism and populism, and they try to create a workers' party, but they also fail in that. And there are other kind of more local movements that have emerged in some parts like El Alto, but at the same time, like it's very difficult to get an inscription in Bolivia, and things are really strange, right? Like there are some parties on the right that would technically are in the ballot line of once a very radical party, but that somehow like now runs neoliberal. So like Bolivian ballot access is very kind of weird, and in that sense, it has more or less prevented opposition toward the movement toward socialism to the mass. But there is also something to be said about the mass, like in comparison to Correa in Ecuador, which is a central figure, like that aggregates like kind of like a significant segment of the left right behind him, even if there are other expressions of the left, like kind of the hegemonic expression of the left in Ecuador is pro Correa. In Bolivia, kind of like the mass originates as a in its own name as an instrument of political change, and that is part of different trade unions, the indigenous rights activism, and kind of like, like emergent progressive kind of, like change driven like actions. And so it is a loose coalition, but at the same time it has shown like a lot of capability in the last years. That being said, like the division between Arce and Evo Morales, now it seems much more to do with personality. So Evo Morales was much more like outspoken. Like he had a much more experience. Like he come from the trade union movement. He's much more, like he has this kind of gestures that make him do things that people consider like almost impossible. Like at one point, like the FIFA was going to ban basically playing in any stadium over 3,000 meters. The problem, like, I think there are other countries that have like really high stadiums, but the issue is that Bolivia was probably the most famous country that could be banned to play in their own capital, La Paz, because the stadium is higher. And he somehow managed to press campaign against FIFA, and although FIFA never goes back against their statements, in that time they did. So it is an example, and there are many like when they tried to arrest him in detaining his playing, and he managed the international community to apologize, and a lot of things that are show a very high political caliber. But at the same time, I think his personalism has caused a lot of problems for the Bolivian left, and that the support for Arce shows that there are kind of a faction that of the mass that prefers like kind of like the um
What would you say is a big difference between Arce and Evo Morales?
it's interesting because the other day, like in the context of this coup, was interviewed like Ricardo Soberon, who is a Peruvian lawyer, but he worked until recently in Bolivia, and like he was the advisor for the European Union, like, and he like reviewed the projects of funding in anti-drug trafficking efforts. So the the issue is that when he was asked the same question that you are asking me, he mentioned that in principle he don't see a very like very big um, division. Uh, in the sense, the way that the construction of discourse has been happening, like a lot of the, even in international relations, it is very similar. They are slightly more pro Cuba, pro Venezuela, um, uh, pro Russia, pro China, pro Iran. So it's not a change that is as big, but the issue is what Zuniga seem to have a prior like distaste of Evo Morales. And according to a Spanish journalist like that was speaking the other day, he in 2019 mentioned that in the previous coup, like Zuniga has been the one that called the police and call them to side with Agnes. So it's not someone that is unknown to kind of controversy. It has controversies like his grades were not too well, so it was kind of controversial. He got ascended. He had controversies over alleged corruption, and Zúñiga, this general that led this coup, also um, seems that didn't like Evo Morales, and maybe that's also a reason why Arce put it, because in now like this open um, very open, like political debate, or if you will like it, confrontation between Evo Morales and Luis Arce. This place that has been there, like the of the military, is a military that has been much more friendly than people used to think. It has have a kind of general replacement, and there are people that are much more sympathetic toward a much more of left wing politics. Um, the the construction of this coup seems to have been very vague, and what it seems is like when he was replaced, because he started to say things like that he was going to arrest Evo Morales and things like that, like like even Arce, which is very opposed to Evo, like 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 it was too much, and he replaced it, and then he tried to stage a coup basically in order to remain, and that's why he started saying like we are going to liberate like the political prisoners, which by then they mean like kind of more the right wingers, like connected with the previous coup. But they didn't support him, so it is kind of strange, like um I feel that there are several things that have been theorized, right? That this has to do with Russia. That there is a lithium alliance with Russia now, but it doesn't seem that way. Like in the sense, like it seems like kind of he wanted to build support even if it didn't have a very elaborate plan. But some, like what I think, that obviously the theories of the CIA and are very wild. Something that is like Ricardo Soberon was the advisor for the for the European Union in Bolivia, did mention is that more recently, like he has saw American diplomats in Bolivia trying to speak much more friendly toward the government there. So it seems like the American diplomacy, which was kind of quiet in Bolivia, like they saw us as very much more unfriendly to them. The rest of Latin America is now trying to reach out to Bolivia. So and they even have given some funding to buy some weapons to for anti-drug trafficking efforts. So so there is that, like it is interesting, like the OIS, the Organization of American States, have give like its opposition to the coup, and the only exception has been Argentina. Like Javier Milei has doubted that this has been a coup attempt. He and curiously Evo Morales have pointed out like this is a fake coup, but 14 people have got injured. Like it's not something like some sort of theater. Like it is. It was some sort of coup attempt, which was, even if very clumsy, which was real, right? Like like it's it,
But
it
but it
yeah.
sounds like you question the US's potential involvement in this coup.
I think, yeah, I think it is interesting because there have been like I I will say at least three, well, two combatants before, because
Mhm.
there was one like that was not much spoken, but there was a Bolivian Jewish nationalized Hungarian for some reason that became also a Muslim and then a Nazi, that tried to kill Morales, but yeah, he was killed by the military. Like that didn't give much on the news, but it was kind of a sign that there were kind of people, even if not exactly on the country, because his ally was an Irish dude, somehow. But then it was like the 2019, and that was really much more linked to the US, it seems, because in that case, like it was Trump in the in the White House. So in that sense, like probably the reaction of democratic administration will have been different. That being said, also it's mentioned that in 2016, if Hillary will have won, I don't think she will have been particularly sympathetic to Evo Morales also. So it is still kind of complex to speculate like how it will have been, but it's probably that it's that at least it wouldn't have been so much sympathetic to the right wing narrative, at least per se. uh, and in the context of foreign involvement, I think something interesting about one former minister of Evo Morales that has been critical of Evo Morales, but he has mentioned that in the 2019 there were important efforts of the in the eastern part of the country, which is much more tropical. So generally, people think of Bolivia as an Andean country, and that's true for a significant part of the country. But the eastern part, like, is both the Amazonian part and then the Chaco area, which is much more tropical. Also, some forests, and in that area, like, there are a lot of agribusiness from some are local from the local industry, but others are from Brazilians. So Brazilians have been expanded to our neighboring countries, like Paraguay and Bolivia, to expand like cattle ranching, because cattle ranching like employs so much space. So in order to allow cattle ranching, like, and they have been cutting a lot of trees, and a very dramatic ecological devastation that also generated a lot of fires. And that there seems to be some interest that were in the 2019 to support kind of Agnes, because she gave a lot of green pass when she was in office. I think that as far as what we know about this, like, the international community has been very silent, right? In a sense, like, it like, unlike, like, and only one, I think, one Colombian politician openly supported the coup, right? And Argentina has had this narrative that the coup was fake, but at the same time, it was not. It didn't, like, the government didn't kind of support it. And yeah, even like Paraguay was has a right wing government, also didn't like support it. So I think they they were confused about like the whole nature of this. And there is something interesting about like the declarations of Zúñiga, because like he spoke like the army is the political, the military expression of the people. So he tried to do some sort of more left wing rhetoric at the same time, to try to spoke about releasing the right wing politicians from jail. It was very kind of like of a
In the US, we say you're trying to
difficult
talk out of both
to be
sides of your
successful.
mouth. In the US, we say you're talking out of both
Yeah,
sides of your mouth when you do that. So it's an
yeah,
expression we have here. I'm sure you have something similar where you're from when people do that, right? When they're trying to use leftist rhetoric, but also free right wing political prisoners. Can you hear me?
yeah. It's interesting. I was seeing some of the comments.
Uh oh! Don't
Uh,
look at the comments.
yeah, yeah,
don't do that. It's a dark hole. Um,
well,
Shifting gears to your country, Peru. Um, can you tell us a little bit what's going on there um, since the ouster of Pedro Castillo? We can't say "quote unquote" order has been restored. I've even seen you comment a little bit on social media about kind of this rollback of certain civil rights, especially when it comes to protesting. So,
y-
what's going on in Peru currently?
yeah. I think it is interesting because obviously, as I have mentioned before, like, there was a lot of interest in Pedro Castillo, and then it kind of vanished when he was ousted. And And what happened, like when he proclaimed like kind of a dissolution of the government and things like that, like that was considered a coup by many, although I have to say that there is a very neoliberal political scientist from Argentina that actually argue that it wasn't a coup technically, in the sense like in order to be a coup you have to stay in power at least one day, and he didn't. So there are some technical discussions over what exactly was his proclamation, but still, like he was ousted, and there were few protests, like some called for his reinstallation, but then like it started a violent repression, and then the protests become against the violent repression, like against like the people being killed, and also people were detained, like on the arguments that there was kind of like members of terrorist organizations, things like that. And um and that happened in 2022, in the early part, and 2000, um and to, the things change a lot in that kind of lapse of time, in a sense, like with Dina Boluarte, like kind of has installed a very different kind of frame she has sided with the far right, and in that sense, like even any vaguely progressive attitude of the government has vanished. At the same time, like it is a very kind of weird political process in Peru, in which basically there are not political parties, rather like even like under, like some prosecutors are considering some political parties criminal organizations that are linked to drug trafficking, to money laundering, to mm, well, other kinds of illegal activities, have been linked in a lot of ways with politics. So in a way, the after 50 deaths, like the protests kind of like vanish in a way, but at the same time, like the discontent toward the government has been very very high. Like the disapproval of the government could reach like 90%. And in that context, like there was an attempt to call for new elections, but the Congress didn't want it. Like it has a far right majority, and kind of like Peru Libre was the party of Pedro Castillo, is very divided, has divided in itself, and is much more opportunist. And there has been a huge sense of betrayal, and that has led to a very kind of complex rollback of a lot of functionalities in the state. Like there is a huge crisis now in the Ministry of Health. There are not now there are very few budgets for HIV positive patients, for the diabetes patients, for cancer patients. So it is really a very kind of tragic situation in many parts. Like the transport system is kind of collapsing. The education system also, like the regulatory parts of the education system are kind of collapsing. Like for-profit universities seem to be gaining momentum, and also it were mentioning some for-profit universities in Peru have been uh, under suspicion of being efforts of money laundering. um, so a lot of things have been happening that are really negative in general, and in the political process there have been an attempt to kick out like kind of the more independent judges and prosecutors, and even some police officers from investigating kind of the corruption of the government. As I have mentioned, the justification of the crackdown on the protest was that the protesters were terrorists, but the judicial investigation has shown that none of the protesters have any link with any terrorist organization. But not only that, the is that there is no indication that in Peru there is like, the Shining Path was dissolved, right? And there was a faction that didn't dissolve, but that faction has been very like at opposite sides of the left on anything, and they have not encountered any one of them like being even vaguely supported of the protest.
When you say they're at opposite sides of the left, would you call Peru Libre a left party?
I think it's complicated, right? Like my cousin used to study in the National University of the Center, which is in Junin, which is the region from where he is. And the fire of Vladimir Cerrón, which is the founder of the party, was a very controversial figure, and he was telling me like a lot of controversial things, and that he was known, and he was under suspicion of being a member of the Shining Path. Actually, like the military murder, like in an extrajudicial murder. And then like Vladimir Cerrón went away to Cuba, and he is a very strange character, like and the leader of Peru Libre, you know, truly there are many times like fake accusations of anti-Semitism, but he is one of the ones that he's is unironically an anti-Semitic person. But at the same time, I think it is interesting that you know, like he make a an oncological center in his region, which was kind of praised. But other than that, like he was very questioned when he was the governor of his region in Junin. And yeah, I mean, it is basically using state resources to get rich, right? Like that's basically has been kind of the unity between like Peru Libre and the far right. And I think it is curious because like in a way the political fractionalization has made that a lot of the other kinds of left have been divided, and that's why it is very difficult. Even if they're present in the current Congress, they are very few, because like the divisions between them make them that they're have very difficulty passing the minimum vote requirements, because they are divided in several organizations. So um
So
and
it's not a coalition party, as they say. It's a Peru.
yeah, it's I think, you know, like outside of Uruguay, I think it's very difficult in Latin America for all the left to unite under one banner, and that has been very complex. Even like this is, someone once mentioned the other day, like even like Jose Carlos Mariatti, which is considered like the historical leader of the left, one of the founders of the of the Socialist Party, of the old Socialist Party, which kind of was kind of curious because it was very different from the European Socialist Party, because it was not social democratic, rather than like it ended up becoming, like after his death, like it's curiously closer to mutualism, like kind of like cooperativism, and kind of very proto Titoist kind of politics. But in a way, even he like was kind of pointing out like kind of the contradictions between like the possibilities of in a very large and diverse country, like getting along everyone. Like, and I think that highlights kind of like the social conflict. Like there is a very strong regionalism that has made that the nationalism in Peru is very weak,
Mm.
and that strong regionalism, and maybe not as strong politically, but in a cultural sense, has made that nationalism politically has been very weak in Peruvian context. I think that the interesting part is that other element of Peru is the kind of authoritarian politicians have had some degree of support. I think Velasco Alvarado was a general that led like the revolutionary government of the armed forces and installed the agrarian revolution. Like, you know, like obviously it didn't came from elections. It was kind of like he derogated the current the government in the 60s, and you know, like established in the end of the 60s and the early 70s, kind of a progressive reformist government, like that had one goal to make the impossibility of an alliance between the Marxist guerrillas and the peasant movement, and to some degree, and this is something that some historians have been mentioning now, that it's 45 years of the agrarian revolution, and in that sense it did accomplish that. In when Shining Path didn't have popular support because the Iran Revolution have already happened. So like Shining Path was not like murdering the landlords, like it was murdering sometimes small merchants, things like that really were not necessarily like kind of a big threat to small communities, right? So the the kind of politics that and but he was one of the government, like economic historians seem to agree that he diminished inequality like dramatically, and also even libertarian economists at the George Mason University was saying that he developed like kind of the concept of the proprietor in Peruvian history, because before that, beyond like their basic I don't know, like basic groceries, things like that, like they didn't, the average Peruvian didn't own land, but with the agrarian reform they did. And so that concept of being a proprietor kind of was an element of what then happened with Fujimori and the kind of neoliberal revolution, that everyone tried to become a small merchant in a way. And in that sense also in a very authoritarian way, like both had an element of transformation of both of in the in the material sense, but also in the rhetorical sense. And I think that has been a very complex issue, because both the radical social change has happened on authoritarian governments, and when there have been democratic governments, they have tried to do very little. So that has been kind of like the contempt of a lot of the population. And in that sense, if you have asked me like 2 weeks ago, I will say the international community has done very little, but now I think it has changed, in the sense like now they are sounding much more stronger against Boluarte, mainly because two things. One was the attempt of pass an anti-NGO law, like the Russian law in that is tried to pass in Georgia. And the other one, which is interesting, is that there was an attempt to ban human rights prosecutions. Uh, the human rights cases, like the jurisdiction is that they don't prescribe. So some human rights abuses were committed during the times of the internal armed conflict, which is the time of the conflict between the 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 Peruvian state and the terrorist forces. Many of this time, a lot of the victims were civilians, and some of ju- this judicial process will have involved like members of the army, the police, and some members of the Shining Path and the MRTA. Having said that, there has been a case of rape against minors that were committed by members of the army that has been prosecuted, and the judge that was have had to give the sentence didn't look up at the passing of the of the that law by Congress. But at the same time, like the international committee, like the International Court of Human Rights has, like the Inter-American Court of Human Rights have banned like that kind of process. That being said, the Peru has nominated a controversial lawyer to that court and has been approved. I still don't know exactly like the internal dynamics of the international Inter-American human rights courts, but it seems like that it could have a much right wing integrant in the future. So there is that, like the embassies are concerned about like a lot of laws also are making difficult prosecuting criminal organizations. There are a lot of menace toward the journalists, toward activists, towards to indigenous leaders, towards civic leaders, to any kind um, of any kind of dissent. And at the same time, I have to say, like, there are still like people in the some judges, some prosecutors, and even some police officers of people like that have been tried to be very challenging of those statements. When the law was passed, tried to ban like the prosecution of human rights cases. Surprisingly enough, like there were some former veterans of the armed forces that claimed that this law was not only legal, but it was truly dangerous, because in their minds they didn't join the army to murder like prisoners, which was what some of the cases are are against like the army are, and other cases are rape of minors. So these are not the reasons why people join the army. So there has been a kind of broad opposition toward this, but it doesn't have a support in Congress, and the regional governments also are very kind of opportunistic and have sided with Boluarte. So it's still unclear like where things could go.
Now, before Boluarte, Castillo wanted to dissolve Congress. Also, uh, there's a bit of a similarity. I don't know if you agree that Evo Morales also wanted to kind of circumnavigate Congress and get a third term. That was one of the reasons why I can't think of the Zuniga. Am I saying it right?
Zúñiga.
Zuniga
Yes.
uh, threatened to arrest him even if he appeared because Morales said he was going to run for a third term. Um, how is that looked at from the people's perspective when a leader gets in office and then says they want to get rid of Congress because they feel they need a longer time in office to establish maybe some programs that they ran on? Is that automatically looked at as kind of, oh, here comes the corruption? Or do you personally see this as one of those contradictions, if you will, when it comes to terms in office, you know, or does everybody just want to be Hugo Chavez?
I think it is interesting because I feel that in both cases it was kind of different. In a sense, in Bolivia, it was, Evo Morales had like still a lot of criticism, but it has been a very transformational person. But in the case of Pedro Castillo, outside of like the vaccination process, was even like congratulated on the even the Wall Street Journal of all places kind of congratulated the vaccination process, and said that like even the United States could learn about it, because it was really impressive. Like Peru has more had more COVID-19 vaccination rate than Sweden or Switzerland. So it is very impressive, being a much less European country that obviously Sweden, Switzerland, and having much more languages, having much more issues in connections, and some very far away populations, and still like managed to do a very kind of comprehensive vaccination process was truly impressive. Like, but at the same time, like in other areas, like it was very little like what it was offered. And he, since he was in office, and he knew that there was a kind of opposition from the right, like as we have talked in previous episodes, like they didn't want him to assume in the first place, so he tried to moderate his views, extremely radical. um and that led to kind of like basically a continuation of the status quo. So that was kind of like the complexity. um I feel in Bolivia, like his attempt of Evo Morales of being beyond like kind of like the laws still has more support, because despite all his flaws, like he did some changes. In the case of Peru, it's not that it doesn't have any support, because uh, Pedro Castillo has still some support, but it's more of an idea of what could come rather than what happened, and which it was in a way a continuation of the kind of like automatic pilot, as the term has been called. And in a way, like the automatic pilot of the 90s has been that that a lot of the neoliberal reforms were never reversed, right? Even when the EMF now like kind of has criticized some reforms that it called in the 90s. um, I think it is interesting that, you know, like you had Ollantumala, for example, who was a person also that emerged in, uh, that emerged with a very kind of a strong, um, one would think he will have had a strong chance to do changes. Like he was also someone from the military, although he was democratically elected. But you know, he was very, in a lot of ways, a kind of continuation. He did some moderate efforts on public policy and on kind of some social programs, but it's still like for the huge necessities of the country, of having one of the weakest states, weakest welfare states in Latin America. It was very little what it could offer. And then the government of Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, like beyond like accepting refugees, did much also, because he was also trying to fighting for their political survival. The government of Martin Vizcarra was very focused on the pandemic, so it also wasn't able to do much beyond also some sort of social welfare, but temporarily because of the pandemic. So a lot of the I think there is a social base for a kind of like um um for a for a more radical politics. And if the elections are in 2026, we likely are going to see much more, a much more left wing political discussion, because they see that this kind of coalition is much more far right, even if it has some agreement with Duarte and Peru Libre, which nominally are left wing. But because of that, I think it is very different in Argentina, like where with like kind of like left wing Peronism were part of the establishment in a way. And I think it is interesting because, like, in a way, Argentina and Peru are kind of examples of two countries that Peru had some sort of economic order until recently, and now it kind of like has faded. Like its growth is very stagnant. Argentina didn't have like much economic order, but it had some sort of public policy functionality, right? Like the other day, there was a journalist that lives in Sydney, and she was saying that despite like a strong public policy being very had a lot of people and all of things, like in Sydney, in order to go to some parts of the city, you basically have to take a taxi because there is not the public transport to take some places. But in Buenos Aires, it was the only place where every large part of the city had at least one connection with the metro or the bus system. So that was truly impressive, right? In a sense, like there was a very competent public policy in some areas, despite like there was no economic growth, a lot of issues with their central bank. But and in Peru, like despite a lot of the transfer is chaotic and a lot of things, right? But still, there was kind of economic growth. There was a sense of the economy being moving forward, new companies open, new jobs. But now it has faded, and in Argentina also that sense has faded. There have been a lot of uh, crisis around public transport lately in Argentina. So in that sense, like kind of like there, Argentina and Peru are examples of kind of like of a of of a crisis that is beginning in Latin America, and a crisis of the a crisis of the end of the pink wave in a way. And I feel that is interesting because you have mentioned about like Claudia Sheinbaum. I think in a way Mexico represents kind of the hope for change. I mean, Mexico has a steady economic growth, and in a way is seen as an example in many. And I think there are many legitimate criticisms toward Morena, and as a large party, it has certainly many factions and many different political characters inside. But I think it is interesting what Claudia Sheinbaum could do, even if she's much more of someone who is very technocratic, but at the same time, like has a much more on the ground base of the more activist base of the party.
I mean, there was massive campaigning even out here, you know, where I am in northern Baja, which is kind of filled with U.S. expats, but there was still uh, a lot of campaigning for Claudia Scheinbaum and Morena Party in general. I don't know how many seats they won locally here. I'll have to double check. Um, but the Morena Party, I don't know if I'd call them a full-on leftist party. They're no strangers to foreign capital and neoliberalism. It's not like we have a large welfare state here or even trying to build one out. I mean, it's baby steps, right? You do have, you know, Big Brother right above you in the US. Um, but I don't know. How do you see the Morena Party? Do you see them as a leftist party?
I think it's interesting because it is kind of seems kind of like many parties in Latin America, but also around the world that have some sort of left wing identity. It kind of includes people that may come from a much more radical left, like from the old communist parties and things like that. Like, but at the same time,
Yeah,
it includes,
it's a coalition party here. You know,
yeah.
it does
It,
coalesce with communist parties here in.
yeah, it also has like kind of more social reformism, which in other countries probably will be in a social democratic party, but there is not an explicit social democratic party in Mexico or within Morena. So I think that kind of like obviously has people that come from very different political backgrounds, but seems that Mexico is like Morena, and there is kind of some establishment view in the rest of political parties about being pro trade, for example, right? So that is something that has been many times contrasted, like when mentioning like with Argentina, right? Like which doesn't have that much pro trade vibe on a lot of things. Um, and I think it's interesting because like AMLO has a much more had a very, I think probably there are going to be a lot of continuation in his foreign policy, like to be sympathetic of the governments that nominally are on the left. Although, like for example, Boluarte and AMLO has a very bad relationship. So in that sense, like there are like possibilities of breaking, right? Like and Peru now, like in Mexico, have a much more complicated diplomatic issues, right? And I think it's interesting. I think that a lot of the this what it has what is happening now, I think in Mexico is it's a very curious case in the sense, like in a way, like the structure of capitalism is not what is questioning, but the form of capitalism. And at least there is some sort of honesty, because other times like there has been a very kind of radical rhetoric, but it's still not even a vague questionation of kind of the model. And in that sense, I think there is at least a bit of honesty in some people within Morena that like it's not a very radical transformation, the one that like it depends on how one uses the term radical, but rather a kind of more try to build a welfare state, right? Like, which is not that simple. And the these attempts have been made, like in Venezuela, like in the times of Chavez, in Bolivia, in Ecuador. But I think, like, when the state, it's going to be very complex, because when the state is not that big, like, the military takes a big part of the process of building a welfare state, and that is what complicates things, right? It complicated things in Venezuela, but it also has complicated things in Bolivia and in Ecuador. um, because it has, in a way, it moderates their, in a lot of ways, like their social policies. It moderates a lot of things that could have been more radical. But at the same time, it's difficult to have some sort of other, for example, like in issues like water, in Mexico. When I see I have a problem with water, like, it's the army that goes, like, with water. And
Well,
for example, like, Uruguay
yeah.
also has had a massive drought, and it's not, it's the municipality, right? Like, so that is the issue, right? Like,
Well, I
that when
I guess
the
I would add to some degree, when you have a military, this is going to sound probably pretty bad to most people, but when you have a military, you have organization and you have a certain level of bureaucracy that can get certain things done efficiently, right? So, for the example of, you're saying, like, with water,
Mhm.
we don't really have city and local governments and even police departments. I couldn't even tell you what department could orchestrate something like that other than the military, because you have the numbers, you have the ability, um, and you kind of have a certain amount of bureaucracy, which you kind of need for, big rollouts like that. Again, I kind of look towards somewhere like Venezuela. I do understand the complications, but would you say, I would love to continue this in the champagne room. Would you say that some of these people are trying to re-envision the utility of the military, or no?
Yeah, I think it is that this is where it gets complicated, because, like, in the cases, in many cases in Latin America, like, the military is also involved in the drug trafficking, so it gets a lot of complication, right? Because if you really side with the military, like, it's very difficult to then, like, prosecute kind of like the cases of drug trafficking, because it has a deep, like, implication. For example, in the Peruvian case, like we know, like, that the Ecuadorian, like, the foreign criminal gangs that are currently operated in Ecuador have military weapons from Peru. So they certainly, there are people in the Peruvian military that are selling those weapons, right? um uh, I think that is the kind of complexity, like, that, with all the problems that there are in Peru, at least I've not have seen, like, the military being as central. And because it could complicate things. Like, Martin Vizcarra tried for a while. He called on the military to, but then they weren't much sympathetic to the idea, even, like, so. um what they did, like, and in the context of the pandemic, was try to be like some sort of second police, right? Like, into the agreement of the curfew. So, but beyond that, it's not, they were not particularly sympathetic to that idea. I think it also has to do, like, that some militaries are much, are more heterodox ideologically, right? And when they are much more conservative, also, like, some sort of things probably not going to fly with them, right? um I do feel like that there is an interesting discussion over how ideological are the military going to be, right? Like, there has been a minor dispute between Argentina and Chile, because allegedly Argentina was put in the, like, a kind of like, the some equipment for batteries in Chilean territory. So it is going to be kind of complicated, to what degree, like the militaries are going to play, particularly when you have very ideological governments like Javier Milei, right? And I think it's interesting, like the role the militaries are going to play. Uh, in a country like Argentina, where the state was really big, like military didn't have a central role. Also because its role in the kind of like the what was called the dirty war, right? So because of that, like it was very difficult for the Argentinian state to put the military on a large scale. But now with Milei, that could change, right? And at the same time, like I think it is going to be curious the role that the military could have with Javier Milei, because the military is much more heterodox in Argentina, right? And for example, if there is elections, he loses, his coalition loses, he doesn't want to go out. I think like you're going to see a very some some even spoke about the possibility of a coup in Argentina, right? So there is a lot of questions about the military's intersection with politics that are going to be curious in this decade, and particularly in Latin America, because it seems like it's the region where because like the political flows are very unpredictable, like the military have some sort of stability which could play a role in kind of the outcomes in the end.
Well, let's continue this conversation for a little bit in the champagne room. I sent you the link. You have it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging out with Camilo and I, TIR South America. We got to send you a TIR hoodie.
Yeah.
You got to just, if you send me your, if you give me your address before we go officially, just email me your address, and
Yeah.
I'll get one to you, so you can rep the show, unless you think it's dangerous.
No. Yeah, I send you. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want you to get shot. Revolution. What? So thank you so much, Camilo. The link is already up in the champagne room if you want to join Camilo and
Yeah.
I to continue this conversation, because I definitely want to ask a few more questions about about Argentina,
Yeah.
and ask some questions also about um, follow up a little bit more on Mexico, and then get a little bit into Venezuela if we have time. So thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we'll see you in a second in the champagne room. Give us 5 minutes or so, and we are out.